The trade station was always loud and dirty. Aliens of all shapes and sizes moved through the narrow streets. Vendors shouted in strange languages, trying to sell old parts, fake gems, and stale food. No one looked down, no one cared what was on the floor. But Darren did. The human engineer had lived on Outpost 9 for almost 5 years. He had seen everything from pickpockets to dying beggars, but today, something made him stop, behind a broken crate, next to a garbage pile. A small alien girl was crawling on all fours. Her hair was wild and full of dirt. Her clothes were no more than strips of cloth barely hanging from her body. She sniffed at the trash like a starving animal. Then slowly, she picked up something, a half-eaten fruit, and stuffed it into her mouth. Her eyes darted around, checking if anyone saw her, when no one came. She reached for another dirty piece of food, and another. Darren felt something twist in his chest. Others just walked by, ignoring her like she didn't exist. Some even kicked the crates near her without noticing her body was there. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just kept eating, like a silent ghost of the street. Darren stepped closer, carefully. He crouched down near the trash pile, not saying anything at first. The girl froze, her eyes wide, glowing faintly blue in fear. She growled like a small animal, holding her food tight to her chest. "It's okay," Darren said softly, his voice calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." She bared her small teeth, hissing like a cornered animal. Darren noticed her arms. Thin like sticks and covered in bruises, her legs looked too weak to stand on. But her eyes were not those of a beast. They were sharp, intelligent, and full of pain. Something deep inside Darren stirred. This wasn't just some lost creature. This girl was more than what she looked like. She had dignity, hidden under layers of dirt and fear. She had once known better days. He could feel it. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl didn't speak. She just blinked at him. Confused, unsure, she tried to crawl away, but her legs shook and gave up under her. She fell face first onto the dirty ground, whimpering. Darren stepped forward quickly and reached out his hand. She flinched, expecting pain, but his hand didn't hit her. It waited, open, still kind. Seconds passed. The girl stared at his hand like it was something strange and new. No one had offered her anything before, not even a glance. Now this human was offering something soft, something safe. She reached out slowly, touched his hand with her small fingers, then quickly pulled away like it burned. Darren didn't move. "It's all right," he whispered. "You don't have to eat from the dirt." Tears filled her large alien eyes. She made a small sound like a broken sob, then looked down at the food in her hand. Then she dropped it. Piece by piece, she let the dirty scraps fall to the floor. Her body trembled, not just from cold or hunger, but from shame. Darren took off his jacket and wrapped it around her. She was light, too light, as he lifted her carefully into his arms. She didn't fight. She just looked at him with wide, silent eyes. The crowd around didn't stop to look. No one cared that a human was carrying a filthy alien child wrapped in a jacket. But Darren walked with purpose. His steps were steady. He had made a choice. This girl wasn't an animal. She wasn't garbage. She was something else. And he was going to find out who she really was, back at his repair shop. The girl sat on a soft chair for the first time. She didn't know what to do. She just looked around, like a wild animal brought into a new world. Darren handed her a clean piece of bread. She took it carefully, sniffed it, then bit into it slowly. Her eyes widened at the taste. Tears ran down her cheeks again as she chewed. Darren didn't speak. He just watched her eat, not like a stray dog, but like someone who mattered. In that moment, he didn't see a wild alien girl. He saw someone important. He saw a little princess, hidden beneath dirt, fear, and silence. And she looked at him like no one ever had before. Darren's workshop smelled like metal and old oil, but for the little alien girl, it was the safest place she had ever been. She sat on a small padded seat, wrapped in Darren's oversized jacket. She clutched the edges like it was a shield, her eyes watching every corner of the room. He didn't push her to talk. He just worked nearby, cleaning an old circuit board and humming to himself. Once in a while, he looked at her and smiled gently. It wasn't the kind of smile that asked for anything. It was the kind that said, "You're safe here." The girl hadn't spoken a word since he brought her in, but her eyes, they were slowly changing. The fear was still there, but now it had cracks. Through those cracks, something else peeked out: curiosity. Darren noticed when she moved closer to the food shelf, she didn't steal, just stood there. Looking at the fresh bread and water, he walked over slowly, picked up a small bottle, and offered it to her. She stared at the bottle like it was magic, then took it with both hands and drank, not in a rush like before, but carefully, like she didn't want to waste a single drop. Later that night, while the stars shimmered above Outpost 9, Darren searched through the old records. He opened up his dusty universal translator, scanning her face into the system. The results took a few minutes. When the screen lit up, Darren leaned forward, surprised. Velari status: extinct, believed. Last record: Royal House of Velthara. Planet Velen, destroyed during the Zarkan Purge War. He blinked twice and stared at her again. No wonder she looked different. No wonder her eyes had that strange glow. She was Velari, one of the most elegant and respected alien races before they were hunted down. He read about them long ago. Velari were known for their peaceful rule, wisdom, and deep empathy. And now, only this girl remained. Darren stood up and walked over to her slowly. She was sitting on the floor now, curled up in a corner with a blanket he had given. When he sat beside her, she looked up without fear this time, just quiet eyes waiting. "You're Velari," he said gently, pointing to the screen. "Velari from Velen." She didn't speak, but her eyes grew wide. She looked at the screen, then back at him, then she nodded just once, slowly. That one nod told Darren everything. She knew who she was. She just hadn't been treated like it in a long time. "Do you remember your home?" he asked. Her lips trembled, and she looked down. Then she reached under the ragged cloth tied around her neck. From within, she pulled out a small pendant metal, cracked but shaped like a royal emblem. Darren gently took it and examined the design. There was a faded symbol in the middle, a flower with 7 petals and a star in the center. The emblem of the Velen royal family. She wasn't just Velari, she was royal blood. A princess. Forgotten and thrown in the trash. Darren felt anger rise in his chest. Who had done this to her? Why had no one helped her before? Why was a child like this treated worse than an animal? He looked at her again and said, "You're not trash. You're not a dog. You're a princess." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for his hand. She held it tightly, like she had been waiting for someone to say those words her whole life. The next day, Darren went to the market to buy her new clothes. He found soft, simple fabrics that would be gentle on her skin. When he returned, she was asleep on his workbench, curled up like a cat in the sunlight. He quietly laid the new clothes beside her. She woke up slowly, blinking. When she saw the clothes, she looked at him with confusion. He nodded. "For you." She touched the fabric with trembling fingers, then hugged it to her chest and whispered her first word since arriving. "Thank you." Darren's heart nearly stopped. Her voice was soft, broken, but full of something more: hope. That night, he gave her a name until she was ready to share her real one. He said, "I'll call you Kira." She smiled, small and shy, but it was the first smile he had seen from her. But as peace settled into the small shop, trouble brewed outside. The scanner logs from the trade station had captured Darren carrying her. Facial recognition software worked fast, and soon, a bounty alert flashed across a dark screen in a private facility. Target located. Unauthorized host of Velari subject. Reward for retrieval: 50,000 credits. Subject classification: escaped genetic experiment, highly dangerous in the shadows. Someone whispered, "Prepare the retrieval team." And in Darren's peaceful little shop, the girl he called Kira hugged her new clothes, not knowing that her past was coming to find her. The morning light came through the cracked windows of Darren's repair shop. Outside, Ships buzzed through the air lanes, and vendors shouted in the distance. But inside, the little Velari girl named Kira sat at the edge of a small table. She wasn't crouching anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was sitting like a person, wrapped in clean clothes, her legs still weak but tucked beneath her gently. Darren placed a steaming mug of broth beside her. She looked up at him and nodded. "Warm," she said softly, one of the few words she had started learning. Her voice was still quiet, but no longer afraid. It was growing like a small light in the dark. Over the past few days, she had started to understand more of his words. She would point at objects and repeat them. Bread, light, bed, water, safe. She repeated safe often, like it was her favorite word. But Darren knew peace wouldn't last long. Someone had already pinged his system with questions about her. He'd turned off the outer scanners since then. He didn't want anyone tracking her again. Still, he needed answers. She wasn't just a lost child. She was a mystery, and mysteries didn't survive long in places like Outpost 9. That afternoon, while Kira napped with a blanket wrapped tightly around her, Darren returned to the back room. He dug through his old tech bins, looking for something he hadn't touched in years. It was an old Velari data decoder. He had salvaged it from a derelict ship 2 years ago. At the time, it hadn't worked. Now, it might be the only thing that could help. He brought it to his workbench and started cleaning the rusted edges. Then, using his tools, he carefully opened the internal chips and adjusted the circuits. After 3 hours, the machine blinked once, then twice. Then a soft chime echoed from within. It was alive again. He walked over to Kira, still resting, and gently woke her. "I need your help," he said softly. She rubbed her eyes and sat up. Darren held out the Velari pendant she always wore. He pointed to the decoder. "Can we try?" She looked scared at first, clutching the pendant tightly. But then slowly she nodded, with shaking hands. She removed it and gave it to him. He placed the pendant into the decoder's core slot. The machine hummed, blinked, and began to glow blue. Then it spoke, not in human language, but in old Velari tongue. Kira's eyes widened. Her lips moved silently as she listened. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered translations as best as she could. "Princess Kyra of House Velthara. Official heir. Escape protocol activated. Memory lock installed." Darren's heart pounded. She really was a princess, not just a child of Velari blood, but the last living heir. And someone had locked her memories, possibly to protect her during war. She didn't just lose her family, she had been forced to forget them. "Can you remember now?" he asked gently. She closed her eyes tightly, shaking her head. Then slowly she spoke. "I remember fire, screaming. Mother's voice." She held her head in her hands. Then silence. Darren put a gentle hand on her back. "You don't have to remember everything now," he said. "We'll take it one day at a time." Later that night, Kira drew pictures with colored wires on the work table. She bent them into shaped stars, moons, and what looked like a flower with 7 petals. "The royal seal," she whispered, pointing at it. Darren sat across from her, amazed. She was remembering not with words, but with feelings and hands. Suddenly, the shop's internal alarm blinked red. Darren jumped up, checking the scanner feed. A group of unknown figures in black armor had entered the outer alley. They moved quietly, but with purpose. Not thieves, hunters. Kyra's eyes widened when she saw them on the screen. She backed away from the table, her hands trembling. Darren pulled down the emergency cover over the window. "Go to the back room," he said quickly. She obeyed without question. Darren activated his old defense system. It wasn't much, just a couple of shock panels and a stun turret. But it might be enough to buy time. He grabbed his welding tool. It wasn't a weapon, but it burned hot enough to cut through steel. Then he heard the first knock. It wasn't loud, just calm, like they weren't even worried. A voice spoke through the door, metallic and cold. "Hand over the girl. She is government property." Darren's grip tightened. He didn't know who they were, but he knew one thing. Kira was not property. She was not a tool, a lab subject, or a forgotten princess. She was a child who had survived everything, and now she had someone willing to fight for her. He turned off the safety on the turret and whispered to himself, "Over my dead body." The walls shook with the sound of metal fists pounding against the front door. Darren's defense system lit up, turrets humming, shock panels fully charged. Kyra sat hidden in the back storage room, curled into a corner with her pendant clutched tightly in her hand. Her breathing was fast, her eyes wide with fear. This felt too familiar: darkness, panic, and the threat of being taken again, outside. The bounty hunters weren't in a hurry. They were professionals. They had seen fugitives panic, flee, fight. They expected the same from the human inside. But Darren was not just any human. He adjusted the controls of the turret, checking its aim through the small monitor. He whispered to himself, "One shot to distract, one to wound." Then with a deep breath, he pressed the trigger. The turret fired with a loud zap, sending a stun blast through the door's opening. A loud thud followed a body collapsing. Darren grabbed his tool bag, slung it over his shoulder, and ran to the back room. He opened the hidden panel behind the supply rack, revealing an old maintenance tunnel. Kira looked at him, trembling. "We have to go," he said quickly. "They'll break through in minutes." She didn't move. She just stared at the tunnel, dark, cold, unknown. He dropped to one knee in front of her. "I know you're scared," he said softly. "But I promise I won't let them take you again." She looked into his eyes, searching, then slowly nodded, with Kira in front of him. They crawled through the narrow tunnel. Dust and cobwebs clung to the walls. Every small sound echoed like thunder. Behind them, the workshop shook. Another explosion. This one closer. Darren gritted his teeth. They were running out of time. They exited the tunnel behind an abandoned cargo station. A few crates lay stacked nearby, and Darren led Kira behind them to catch their breath. She coughed, covering her mouth with her sleeve. Darren looked around, then checked his wrist combs. He had one contact left on this planet, an old smuggler named Hex who owed him a favor. He tapped the signal beacon. "Please pick up, you old rust bucket," he muttered. A few seconds later, the tiny screen blinked. Hex's greasy face appeared, chewing something that looked half dead. "Darren? What mess are you in now?" "I need a ride," Darren said. "Now, and I'm bringing someone." Hex raised an eyebrow. "Someone as in a legal cargo?" "As in a child," Darren snapped. "A hunted child," Hex sighed. "I'm at Dock 7. Darren ended the call and turned to Kira. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though her legs were shaking. "I'll carry you if I have to," he said. She took a step, then another, slow, steady, brave. But as they neared the docking yard, red lights flashed overhead. A patrol squad was already sweeping the area. Darren pulled Kira into a storage unit, closing the door behind them quietly. Inside, it was dark, filled with old containers and broken tools. Kira looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "They always find me." Darren crouched in front of her. "Not this time," he said. "You're not alone anymore." But fate had other plans. A sharp clang echoed outside, the sound of boots on metal, then a voice, loud and cold. "Human. Darren Gray, you are charged with harboring a fugitive genetic asset." The door blasted open with a wave of force. Darren was thrown to the ground, sparks flying around him. Kira screamed, crawling backward until her back hit the wall. Two armored figures stormed in, grabbing her with metal cuffs and binding her wrists. "No!" Darren gasped, pulling himself up, but a third figure struck him across the chest with a shock baton. Pain exploded through his ribs, and he dropped to the floor again. Kira kicked and screamed, but they shoved a collar around her neck. She went silent instantly, her eyes rolling back slightly. The collar had sedative tech built in. She was awake, but weak and unable to move. "Leave the human," one of the soldiers said. "We have what we came for." The others didn't argue. They dragged Kira away, her head limp against her shoulder. Darren lay on the cold floor, his breath shallow. Blood trickled from his lip. But his mind raced. They had taken her, again, and this time she was chained like a thing. A lab tool, but Darren was not done. His body screamed in pain, but his heart burned with fury. He pulled himself up. Using the crates for support. His comms device was broken, but the signal was still active. Hex would be waiting at Dock 7, and Darren would get there. He would save her. He limped into the alley, holding his side. Every step was pain, but every step was also a promise. He had seen Kira eat from trash like a dog. He had seen her cry, whisper, and slowly become something more. A princess, yes, but more than that, someone who mattered. Someone who trusted him, and now she was in chains. Again, but not for long, Darren whispered. I'm coming, Kira. They don't know who you are, but I do. The room was white, too white. Lights buzzed quietly from the ceiling. The floor was clean and cold like ice. Kira sat in the center, chained to a metal chair. Her wrists were bound, and the sedative collar still clung to her neck. She couldn't move her arms freely. She couldn't scream even if she wanted to. But her mind was still awake. And it hurt. Voices echoed behind the glass wall in front of her. Figures in dark coats watched her from the other side. She is stable, one of them said. But the memory suppression is damaged, said another. She remembers too much. She must be reset. Kyra's heart raced. They weren't treating her like a person. They were talking about her like she was an object. A broken machine. A failed project. Suddenly, the glass wall slid open. A tall alien man stepped inside, his skin a pale silver, his eyes glowing green. He walked around her slowly, inspecting her face. You should not exist, he whispered. You were supposed to be erased. Kyra met his gaze without blinking, even in chains, even weak. She remembered what Darren had said. You're not trash. You're a princess. The silver alien leaned close to her face. You're nothing, he sneered, but she didn't look away. She simply whispered one word. Darren. Outside the compound, at Dock 7, a smuggler's ship hovered quietly in stealth mode. Hex leaned against the control panel, chewing dried meat and muttering. This better be worth it. Behind him, someone climbed aboard limping, bruised and breathing hard. It was Darren. You look like roadkill, Hex grunted. Darren ignored the insult. She's inside the Sector 4 research block, he said. They took her in chains. Hex raised an eyebrow. You're serious about this kid, huh? She's not a kid, Darren growled. She's the last of her kind. And I bowed to her because I saw what no one else did. Hex sighed and leaned forward. Well, let's break in and upset the entire security grid of this planet then. Again, the ship lifted quietly into the clouds. Darren checked his tools, welding cutter, shock gloves, EMP grenade. He didn't have real weapons, but he had purpose, and sometimes that was deadlier. Back in the white room, Kyra's head drooped as her body weakened further. The collar was draining her energy bit by bit, but in her mind, she heard Darren's voice. You are not an animal. You are someone. She remembered how he looked at her the first time. Not with fear, not with disgust, but with respect. The tall alien turned away, giving orders. Begin the reprogramming, he said. 2 guards stepped in, approaching her with a metal headset. Kira closed her eyes. Suddenly, boom. An explosion rocked the hallway. Red lights flashed, and the room's walls shook. The guards turned toward the door, weapons drawn. Then the door flew off its hinges. Smoke filled the room, and out of it stepped Darren, coughing, holding a broken tool like a sword. Step away from her, he shouted. The guards laughed at first. But then Darren threw the EMP grenade. The entire room buzzed with energy, then went black. The collar on Kyra's neck sparked and fell off. She gasped, finally able to move again. Darren ran to her, unchaining her wrists quickly. Kyra, can you stand? She nodded, her legs trembling. He held her hand tightly. I came back, he whispered. I told you I would. They turned to escape, but the tall alien blocked the exit. You dare attack a royal research center? He snarled. Darren stood in front of Kira, raising his fists, but Kira stepped forward before he could fight. Her body weak, her breath shallow, and yet she stood tall. She looked the alien in the eye and said, "I am Princess Kyra of Velan. I am not your test subject, and this human bowed to me when I had nothing." The alien hesitated, shocked by her words. Kira continued, "I will not be taken again." She raised the metal collar in her hand and crushed it under her foot. Darren smiled proudly. "She's got more spine than the whole council," he muttered. Behind them, Hex's voice echoed through the comlink. "You two better run, because I just hacked half the system and the other half is hunting us." Darren grabbed Kyra's hand. "Let's go, Your Highness," he said with a grin. They raced through the halls. Alarms blaring, lights flashing red, doors closed, guards shouted, but they kept moving. By the time they reached the outer pad, Hex had lowered the ramp. "Get in, royalty and rescuer," he shouted. They climbed aboard, breathless, as the ship took off into the sky. Kira sat beside Darren and looked out the window. The chains were gone, the collar broken. She was still tired, still scared, but no longer alone, and now the galaxy knew she wasn't just a lost girl in rags. She was royalty, and the first person to bow to her was human. Asterisk. The stars outside the ship window sparkled like a sea of diamonds. Kira sat beside Darren, wrapped in a warm blanket, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Her eyes weren't filled with fear anymore. Now there was wonder, confusion, hope. They had escaped, but the questions hadn't. Who was she really? What did the pendant around her neck truly mean? And why had so many powerful people wanted her locked in chains? Hex flew the smuggler ship through a quiet space lane, avoiding all official routes. His voice crackled through the intercom. "We're about 4 hours from Velan 3, last known place of the Royal Velari archives." Darren nodded to Kira. "You ready to go home?" Kyra didn't answer right away. She just looked down at her hands. Her fingers were still thin, her wrists still bruised, but they were no longer tied. "I don't know if I have a home," she whispered. Darren turned her face gently toward his. "You have me," he said. "And if what we find proves your royal blood, then you have a right to your home, to your name." The hours passed slowly, but peacefully. Kira slept again. This time without shaking. She didn't dream of trash or cages. She dreamed of stars, open skies, and Darren's smile when the ship finally landed. It touched down on a quiet, icy moon. Velan 3 was cold and covered in ruins, but deep beneath its surface, Darren believed something waited answers. They stepped out into the snow, bundled in coats. Kira walked beside him, still small but no longer broken. "I remember something," she said softly. "A big hall, blue fire, and singing." Darren looked around the landscape. "Let's find it," he said. They reached an old stone structure buried in the snow. The doors were sealed, ancient and forgotten. Kira stepped forward and pressed her hand to the center. At first, nothing happened. But then, the stone glowed beneath her fingers. The door rumbled, unlocking with a deep clang. Inside, blue lights lit up slowly, like the place had waited centuries for this moment. As they stepped into the hall, the floor lit beneath their feet. Walls shimmered with carvings, symbols of the Velari people. At the end of the chamber stood a large circular platform. A voice echoed through the air. "Velari bloodline detected. Royal code confirmed. Crown protocol initiating." Kira's breath caught in her throat. Darren held her hand tightly. A beam of soft light surrounded her, and her pendant lifted into the air. It glowed bright, then split open, releasing data and images into the chamber walls. A hologram appeared, an older Velari woman in royal robes. "Kira," she said warmly, "my daughter, if you're seeing this, then everything we feared has come true." Kyra's eyes filled with tears. "Mother," she whispered. The hologram continued. "You were taken during the fall. We placed a lock on your memories to protect you from breaking. But you are the last heir. You are the light of Velan, The message ended, the platform shifted, and a suit of ceremonial robes rose from the floor. Royal robes. Light as air, glowing with soft silver threads, the room fell silent. Then the voice spoke again. "Do you accept your place as Princess of Velen?" Kyra looked at Darren. "I was nothing," she whispered. "I was fed scraps like a dog." Darren stepped forward and knelt before her again. "You were never nothing," he said. "And I saw your crown long before this room did." Tears rolled down her cheeks. Then she looked up and said clearly, "I accept." The robes floated toward her and wrapped around her gently. Her body glowed faintly, her eyes shimmering with power that had been asleep for years. The broken girl from the alley was gone. In her place stood a princess. The platform shifted again, revealing a console with ancient codes. Kira stepped forward and activated the system. All across the Velari galaxy, hidden relays lit up for the first time in decades. The people who had hidden, who had thought the royal bloodline was lost, now received a signal, a voice that said, "She lives." Back at the ship, Hex looked at the incoming signals and laughed. "You just woke up an empire, kid." Darren stood beside Kira, looking out at the glowing hall. He couldn't believe the same girl who once crawled in filth was now standing under ancient banners. "From trash to throne," he whispered. She looked at him and smiled. "No," she said softly, "from forgotten to remembered." The signal had already spread, across the stars, across dark systems and half-forgotten colonies. The ancient Velari emblem glowed on old walls, dusty ships, and long silent consoles. For years, the galaxy had believed the royal line was dead. For years, the Velari people had hidden like shadows, but now the message was clear: she lives. Inside the royal archive chamber, Kira stood tall in her silver-blue robes. The platform beneath her feet slowly lifted. Light followed her as if it recognized who she was. Her eyes were steady, not the eyes of a scared child anymore, but of someone who had faced chains, filth, and pain, and still stood. Darren stood below, watching her with quiet pride. He remembered that first moment when she looked up from the trash pile. He had seen something, then something no one else bothered to see. And now the galaxy saw it too. The AI voice returned. "Will the Princess of Velen choose her protector?" Kira blinked in surprise. What does that mean?" she asked softly. The AI explained. "Tradition allows the royal heir to name one protector loyal, trusted, and worthy, who shall forever hold the title of guardian of the crown." She looked at Darren, still covered in grease and dust, bruises barely healing. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't royal. But he had carried her when she couldn't walk. He had fought for her when she couldn't speak. He had bowed to her when no one else saw anything but dirt. Kira stepped forward, her voice clear. "I choose Darren Gray, my protector. My friend, my family." The light flared, forming a new symbol behind Darren. A glowing Mark Velari honor, wrapped in human shape. He didn't bow this time. Instead, he placed a hand on his heart and nodded. In that moment, something changed. Not just in the chamber, but across space. Messages began pouring into the system, from Velari survivors hiding in distant colonies, from old allies of the royal house, from planets that once feared the rise of the Velari. Some sent words of support, some sent warnings, but one message stood out. "We come in peace, to kneel before our princess." 3 ships arrived within hours. One was broken and patched together, filled with starving Velari who had waited for this day. Another brought books, archives, and memories long lost. The third was a warship painted with the royal flower crest, untouched since the purge. Kira met them all. She walked with her head high. She greeted the broken like a sister. She read the books like a student hungry to know her truth. And when she stood before the warship, she placed her palm on its side. The ship lit up, engines humming. It had waited for her, like the rest of her people. But not everyone welcomed her return. Across the galaxy, whispers of fear rose. The ones who had profited from the fall of the Velari now trembled. They sent messages to bounty hunters, mercenaries, warlords. Stop her before she becomes too powerful. Darren stood by Kira's side as they read one of the intercepted threats. Looks like they're scared, he said. She nodded. Good. They should be, Darren chuckled. Did I ever tell you? I thought you were just some lost kid when I found you. Kira smiled softly. You saw a princess before even I knew I was one. More ships came over the next few days, Valari flags. Rose again in corners of space where they had been torn down. But Kira didn't demand a throne. She didn't wear a crown. She led by standing with her people, by eating with them, listening to their pain, and reminding them they were not forgotten during a quiet evening as the two sat near the ships. Observation window, Darren asked. What now? Kira looked out into the stars. We rebuild. We find every child like me. Every soul treated like trash. We remind them who they are. Darren leaned back and smiled. And you think one human and one princess can do all that? She looked at him with the same fire she had shown in the throne room. No. She said, but 1,000, 1,000,000 will follow. Because one human stopped. One human looked closer. He nodded slowly. And one alien girl decided to rise. The stars blinked in the dark sky above them, but inside that ship, hope burned brighter, because a little girl who once ate scraps in silence now led a rising people, and the human who gave her a blanket, a name, and his heart, now stood beside her, not as a savior, but as the one who had believed, and belief, when shared with the right soul, could rebuild kingdoms, could turn shame into strength, could turn trash into a throne.